सरस्वती नमस्तुभ्यं वरदे कामरूपिणि विद्यारंभं करिष्यामि सिद्धिर्भवतु मे सदा श्रुति स्मृति पुराणानाम् आलयं करुणालयं नमामि भगवत्पादं शङ्करं लोकशङ्करं पुराणन्याय मीमांसा धर्मशास्त्रांग मिश्रिताः वेदाः स्थानानि विद्यानां धर्मस्य च चतुर्दश आयुर्वेदो धनुर्वेदो गान्धर्वश्चैव ते त्रयः अर्थशास्त्रं चतुर्थन्तु विद्याः अष्टादशैव ताः ओम शांति 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 नमस्ते. On behalf of Indica's Center for Bharatiya Languages, I welcome everyone who has joined us today for a conversation with Professor K.S. Kannan, who is the son Rajinder Singh Ji Maharaj Chair at IIT Madras. Our topic today is an introduction to Kannada literature. This conversation, which will be in English, intends to serve as an introduction, a basic introduction to some facets of Kannada literature. Kannada, as some might know, is one of the 6 languages indigenous to India and which has been recognized by the government of India as a classical language. As per a press bureau found on the Press Information Bureau website, the criteria to determine the declaration of a language as a classical have been 1. High antiquity of its early texts, recorded history over a period of 1500 to 2000 years. 2. A body of ancient literature/texts which is considered a valuable heritage by generations of speakers. 3. The literary tradition be original and not borrowed from another speech community. 4. The classical language and literature be distinct from modern. There may also be a discontinuity between the classical language and its later forms or its offshoots. About Professor Kannan, D.Lit, he has also been the academic director of Swadeshi Indology Conference Series organized by Infinity Foundation India. He is a renowned scholar of Sanskrit, formerly the director of Karnataka Sanskrit University, Bangalore. He has a rich teaching experience of over 4 decades. He is a member nominated by HRD, Government of India, of the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, IIAS, Shimla. Amongst the various recognitions that have been conferred upon him include the title Vidyanidhi by Rangapriya Swamiji, Bangalore, and the International Merit Award for a paper on machine translation. He is a member of the Academic Council of Veda Vijnana Shodha Samsthanam, and Dr. Kannan currently occupies, as I mentioned, the prestigious Saint Rajinder Singh Ji Maharaj Chair at IIT Madras. With that, I welcome you, Professor Kannan, and request you to share your views on this topic.
Thank you very much, dear Meg. I am thankful to Indica and to Meg Kalyansundaram for inviting me to share a few thoughts regarding Kannada literature. As Dr. Meg has brought out, this is only an introductory talk on Kannada literature, and obviously I cannot treat the topic very exhaustively, but it's only some facets of Kannada literature that I'll be introducing. He has already given an introduction to the Kannada language, showing its position as a classical language and showing it as one of the several South Indian languages. And it is known as one among the Pancha Dravida languages. And the language, and in fact even the Karnataka state, has been referred to as Kannadi in Maharashtra, and the Britishers refer to it as Canaries. There are some 38 million speakers, that is to say some nearly 4 crores of speakers of this language. And the script of the language is derived from the Brahmi Lipi, and the earliest inscription that we find in this language is the Halmidi Shasana dated 450 AD. And you can see that even in this, there is an influence of Sanskrit which is evident. And the Chalukyas of Badami, in fact, had Sanskrit inscriptions in the Kannada Lipi, Kannada script. There has been a comment about the Kannada language that it is old Tamil written in Telugu script. This is a description of old Kannada, that it is little else than old Tamil script, old Tamil written in Telugu script. It can be taken both as a sort of a condemnation and a sort of a praise. For those who see this negatively, this would speak of the lack of originality in Kannada. But actually speaking, this can be taken in a positive sense also, which brings out the close affinity among the various languages, those of the South, and the affinity of the language with Sanskrit is quite evident. In fact, all the South Indian languages have something like 80% of their vocabulary derived from Sanskrit, either directly or indirectly. They have this kind of vocabulary. Even though the Tamil speakers or some Tamil scholars would like to say that they have borrowed very little from Sanskrit, there are a lot of apabhramsha forms in Tamil, so which are ultimately derivable from Sanskrit, and therefore even Tamil has a good deal of vocabulary of Sanskrit. So this way, we find that Kannada has a great antiquity. As I said, we don't get any early texts in Kannada, so as against the Shasana, the Halmidi Shasana that I refer to. But then there are a number of documents, so of the Chalukyas of Kalyana and the Hoysalas and the Sevanas and the Vijayanagar documents and Keladi documents and those of Mysore kings. So in all these, you find a good many administrative words in Kannada, and a good part of it linked to Sanskrit. And even Shivaji is said to have visited Bangalore, and some of his edicts, Shivaji's edicts, are in Kannada. So Halmidi Shasana was in Hassan district of Belur Taluk, and the intimate relationship with Sanskrit is very well brought out by the Mangala Shloka of this Shasana, which itself is in Sanskrit. Sanskrit provided an excellent archetype and a classical model for Kannada and for other languages of India. And the link with Sanskrit is both intimate and profound, and one should say it's a very natural one. So Sanskrit being a language of cultivation, it provided various sources of the development of the language. You can see that the Kannada alphabet is nothing but a sort of a Xerox of the Sanskrit alphabet. So the alphabetical system and even the entire grammatical structure of the language, and then the grammatical literature of the language, and the rhetorics of the language, and even the literature of the language, they're all highly inspired by Sanskrit, and we have more or less the same types of classification of literature as Gadya, Padya, Champu, and then Nataka. All these are there. There are many Shastra Granthas also. It is said that there are over 50 works on scientific works on maths and medicine and astrology, and then architecture and geography, and so on. So there are something like some 30,000 inscriptions either on stone or on copper plates called Shila Shasana or Tamra Shasana, and so on. Thus, we find that there is very wide literature in Sanskrit. Nevertheless, it must be remarked that a good deal of what obtains in Sanskrit is something that is there already in Sanskrit. So much so that one scholar by Chavali Ramaswamy Shastri said that the literature in Kannada, especially regarding Chandas, is something that obtains in Sanskrit. It's a miracle reflection, as it were. He says, Channagiye node, Kannadavu Kannadiye. So if you observe closely, you find that what is in Kannada, so is but what is there in Sanskrit already, and thus it is a miracle reflection. And Tinam Shikantiya, making a comment on this in his Bharatiya Kavimamsa, says that this applies even more than Chandas to Alankara Shastra. And we can find that there is a great deal of literature on Alankara Shastra, so on what can roughly be called stylistics and so on, which depended heavily upon Sanskrit and borrowed profusely from Sanskrit. And Tinamshri even says that compared to the vastness of the literature in Sanskrit and the way things have been presented in Sanskrit, in both matters, that is content-wise and regarding presentation, what obtains in Kannada is, however, very small compared to the immensity of literature in Sanskrit. So whether it is by way of poetic literature or Shastra literature. So in fact, that way, most of the Indian languages have a small amount of literature compared to this pan-Indian language, Sanskrit. And this feature is shared even by Kannada language. Now, if you look into the literature of Kannada, we can first give the political background, because a good many literatures were under Rajashraya. They were patronized by kings, and therefore we have to take a quick glance at the political scenario in Karnataka. So from about 6th to 12th century CE, we had the Chalukyas governing southern India and central India, and then came the Gangas. So then we have the Gangas 350 to 1000 CE, Rashtrakuta 6th to 10th century, and then the Hoysalas 10th to 14th century, and the Yadavas 12th to 14th century. And we can find that the literature of Kannada can be broadly divided into three literatures with religious themes primarily. So the first is the Jaina literature, and then the Lingayata literature from 12th century onwards. By 14th century, we find that the Jaina influence has somewhat weakened, whereas the Vaishnava literature has started. So Jaina, Virashaiva, and Vaishnava, these constitute the major periods of the literature of Kannada, even though there are periods of some overlap even among these. Coming to the variety of literature, I have already dwelt upon the various shastras and the various kinds of literature that you find in the Kannada language. And just a minute. Even in the 7th century, this one, we have the Badami inscription, where we already find the earliest stages of the Kannada meter, namely Tripadi. So for which there is a one can cite uh, uh, the verse that is there in the Tripadi language. It says, "Sadhu ge sadhu, madhuryam ge madhuryam, madhavanitam paranallam." So the pattern of Tripadi, we find that is already there in the famous Gayatri mantra, and the same pattern is replicated in the Kannada language also. We find that Kannada language just depends on, even from the earliest times, on Sanskrit literature and the patterns, even in the meter and so on. One of the most important works that we have in Kannada literature is Nripatunga's Kaviraja Marga, that constitutes almost the first important work of Kannada. And this deals with grammar and rhetorics. As I told earlier, there are a good many Shastra works and grammar, prosody, and Alankara. So these constitute some of their chief concerns, and Kannada literature has this recurring feature in Kaviraja Marga. It's a work on practical grammar and how versification is done, how one should not do, all these are indicated. And already Kaviraja Marga is a Lakshana Grantha. Now, any Lakshana Grantha, that is a text that defines the do's and don'ts and gunas and doshas in Kavya and so on and so forth, must necessarily have had a good deal of literature or Lakshya Granthas. But unfortunately, we don't have any reference to any such Lakshya Grantha. So they are not available. However, we can see that Kaviraja Marga itself refers to a good many Purvacharyas. So once again, the grammarians and rhetoricians who preceded Kaviraja Marga work of Nripatunga. And there was also a poet by name Sri Vijaya, who was the court poet of Amogha Varsha, the first Rashtrakuta king. And the earliest prose work that we come across in Kannada literature is Vadda Radhane. So, 9th century, written by Shivakoti Acharya. It has some nearly 20 long stories, and it has fables and parables, and obviously it is based upon the Brihatkatha Kosha of Harishena. So it also brings out many Jain tenets. As you can see that the religious concern of the poets in bringing out the main tenets and doctrines of their various schools of thought, so are more or less present throughout in Kannada literature, as for example, even in Sanskrit literature, even though some amount of secular literature is also present in Kannada literature, though secular literature is rather vast in Sanskrit literature. By secular literature, I only mean works on science, etc. There is, in fact, no clear differentiation between secular works and religious works in Sanskrit. So all along, they have gone on hand in hand, and there was no kind of conflict that we find in the West, for example, between what is religious and secular, the sacred and the profane, and so on. So even the best of astronomers here, for example, in our tradition, so they were all highly devout people, and there was no conflict. So the persisting conflict that we see in the West between science and religion never obtained here, and there's never a case of persecution of any religious scholar or any scientific scholar or any such thing. So this provides a good contrast with the West. Now, the most important poet in Kannada literature is Pampa, who is known as the Adi Kavi. So he deals with the first Tirthankara, Jaina Tirthankara by name Rishabhadeva, in his Adi Purana, which is a Champu work. He is also known for his Vikramarjuna Vijaya, also known as Pampa Bharata. And there is also a famous quotation that is a very popular quotation that is referred to in Pampa's work, which says that he always remembers this Banavasi Desha, which is where he came from. He says, Arankusha Vittudam Nenavudennamanam Banavasi Deshamam Kogilayagi Puttuvudu Nandanadul Banavasi Deshadul. So my mind always dwells on this Banavasi, and I would rather be born as a cuckoo in this Banavasi. So he has such a fondness for his motherland, and he makes a reference to that. Next comes Ponna around 950 AD. So the date of Pampa is about 941, and of Ponna is 950 AD. So he's patronized by a king called Sri Krishna, and he's the author of Shanti Purana, which deals with the story of 16 Tirthankara. And he was very well versed in Kannada and Sanskrit, and he is said to have borrowed a great deal from Kalidasa, and he is known as Ubhayakavi Chakravarti, that is a person who had a thorough mastery in Kannada as well as Sanskrit. And next come the Chalukyas, so the Hoysalas, the Kalachuris of Kalyani, Sevunas of Devagiri, and then Silharas of Karada. So wherein figures Nagavarma, and he was at the court of King Bhoja of Malwa, and he said to have written work on prosody also. Ranna, 982, he is an important poet. He was patronized by Tailapa and Satyashraya, Western Chalukya kings. He wrote Sahasa Bhima Vijaya, also known as Gadayuddha, so in which the conflict between Bhima and Duryodhana is very well portrayed. Ranna glorified Bhima, and it was a sort of a proxy representation of the king Satyashraya, who gave him patronage. And he has also authored Ajita Natha Purana, second Tirthankara, and then Ranna is known as Kavi Chakravarti. And one of the famous quotes of Ranna is his description of Duryodhana while he was deeply immersed in the waters. He had concealed himself in the waters to avoid confrontation with Bhima. So Duryodhana had mastered Jalastambhana Vidya and was immersed in the deep waters when Bhima and Krishna and other Pandavas come to the bank of the lake, and they taunt him, and he has to come out and fight finally, and he is defeated by Bhima. And the imagination of Ranna flies high, and he says, Nirala Girdum Bemartan Uragapatakan. Uragapataka refers to Duryodhana. And while he was inside the water, even there, so he was sweating. So that's the description that is given of Duryodhana sweating there. So we have the work Kavyavalokana, which is once again on grammar and rhetoric, and Karnataka Bhasha Bhushana of Nagavarma, so 1145 CE. This is the next poet that we come across. And next we come to Hoysala period. So these people, the Hoysala kings, are said to have come from the Malenod region. And we come across some of the best periods, best poets like Harihara, Rudrabhatta, Raghavanka, and Keshiraja in this period. To speak a few words about it, Harihara is also known as Harishwara, and he's one of the earliest poets to write on Shaiva themes. He has written Girija Kalyana, so, and 100 poems in Ragale. That is a kind of a literary presentation. Nambi Ennala Ragale is one of his works, and Shivaganada Ragale, and he is known as Utsava Kavi in Karnataka. And then Raghavanka is another important poet. So he is said to be a nephew of Harihara, and he introduced Shatpadi into Kannada, and he wrote Harishchandra Kavya, which is said to violate Kannada grammar here and there, and it brings out the conflict of, between Vasishtha, Vishwamitra, and Harishchandra. And it was this king that this poet that was honored by Rudra, so who is a Kakatiya king, so more famous in Andhra. This also shows that there was a close relationship between people of the Karnataka and people of Andhra. And then we have Rudra Bhatta. He is to be a Smarta Brahmana, and he has written Jagannatha Vijaya. And this Jagannatha Vijaya is based upon Vishnu Purana, and he has written the story up to Banasura Vadha. And he was patronized by one Chandramouli, who was a minister of King Veera Ballala II. Another important poet that we come across in this period is Janna, 1205 CE, who has written Yashodhara Charite, and he is known as Kavi Chakravarti. And he also wrote Anantanatha Purana, which deals with the story of Anantanatha, the 14th Tirthankara. And after this, we come to the Vijayanagara period, 14th century and on. And it was a period of immense political turmoil with the Muslim hordes invading South India. And Vijayanagara provided a very strong fortress against the attack by the Muslim kings. And because of the excellent administration provided by Vijayanagara Empire, the various arts flourished during that period. It is said to be the golden age of Kannada literature. There was, as it were, a competition between Veerashaiva and Vaishnava literature. And it is in this period that we find Kumara Vyasa, also known as Naranappa, 1430. And he is referred to as Rupaka Samrajya Chakravarti. So, because of his highly sophisticated and extended metaphors, he wrote one work called Gadagina Bharata, also known as Karnataka Bharata Ramanjari, also known as Kumara Vyasa Bharata. It deals with the theme presented in the first 10 parvans of Mahabharata. And our 20th century poet Kuvempu has eulogized Kumara Vyasa, saying, Kumara Vyasanu hadidanendere Kaliyuga Dwapara Vaguvudu. So Kaliyuga itself will be turned into Dwapara. So that is the kind of elevation that he brings in, and he vivifies the very story of Mahabharata, presenting it to a Kannada audience. And the author himself had a great humility, saying, Veera Narayanane Kavi, Lipikara Kumara Vyasa. He says, I am only a sort of a clerk. So it is my Lord that is giving the dictation, and I am only just taking down what he says. So it shows how inspired the work was. So it's a blend of both high spiritual inspiration and also mastery of poetry that this work reflects, and the element of humor is not missing in this work. Another poet that we come across here is Timanna Kavi of 1510, and he wrote a work called Krishnaraya Bharata. And around 1500, there came a poet by name Kumara Valmiki, and he wrote Torave Ramayana. This Torave Ramayana is a work which has inspired a good deal of dramatic literature, and especially the Yakshagana literature. And around 1430, we have Chamarasa, a Virishaiva poet, and he was a sort of a rival of Kumara Vyasa, and he wrote Prabhulinga Lile in praise of Allama Prabhu. Now, the 12th literature saw the rising of the Virishaiva literature. So the Kalachuris had rebelled against the Western Chalukyas and had annexed Kalyani. And it is there that we find the beginnings of the Virashaiva or the Lingayata faith, the production on a fairly massive scale of Vachana Sahitya and Sharana Sahitya. Vachana Sahitya is verse, one should say it is free verse, without the constraints of the meteors that are detailed in works on prosody and Alankara Shastra and so on. Basavanna, 1134 to 1196 CE, was the Mantri of Bijala II, and it was he who established this Anubhava Mantapa, where there were spontaneous utterances of many mystic writers of the Virashaiva school of thought, and it's also full of satirical works, so criticizing society. It always so happens that in some period, people pay more attention to the form than to the content, and naturally there will be literature criticizing mere adherence to form, bereft of all content, and therefore the Virashaiva literature often focuses on how riches are useless, even rituals are not very important, and book learning is a waste, and therefore what is truly important is bhakti and so on. So this we find as a recurring feature even in Haridasa literature, which comes during the Vijayanagara period. So the number of Virashaiva poets, I can name only a few: Basavanna, Allamaprabhu, Devara Dasimaya, and then Channa Basava, Siddharama. So, and then Akkamahadevi. So these are all some of the very important poets of the period. And Akkamahadevi literature is full of mysticism, as also of others, but hers is, she lived for hardly 30 years, but then her literature is full of the richness of the mystical experiences and so on. In fact, even in 15th century, there was a sort of a revival of Virashaiva literature with Nijaguna Shiva Yogi, who brought out the philosophy of Kaivalya, and he brought out Advaitic and yogic thoughts in his work. And he wrote also an encyclopedic work by name Viveka Chintamani. And there was this Muktina Shalakshari, and then Chidananda Avadhuta, Sarpabhushana Shiva Yogi, and so on. These are all influenced by Basavanna and the subsequent literature. And there are some famous quotes of Basavanna and others, which are very popular. Now, for example, Basavanna says, what is purity? He stresses on inner purity and external purity, saying, adhere to these simple rules, that is good enough. He says, Kalabeda, Kolabeda. So don't commit theft, and then don't kill. So don't steal and don't kill. Speak truth, Husiya Nudiyalu Beda, Tanna Bannisa Beda. So do not describe yourself in glorious terms. Idara Haliyalu Beda. So do not speak ill of others. Ide Antaranga Shuddhi, Ide Bahiranga Shuddhi. Elsewhere he says, Namma Kudala Sangama Devanu, Sangeeta Priyanalla, Veda Priyanalla, Adare Bhakti Priya. So he says, my Lord does not love music, does not love the Vedas, but he loves Bhakti. The idea is only to underline the fact that the Bhakti is the essential content, and even though it's true that Sangeeta and Veda, they are all highly conducive to Bhakti and so on, while people like to adhere to the exteriors, forgetting the most essential thing, then it naturally doesn't serve any great purpose. So he also says, Ullavaru Shivalayava Madavaru, Nanena Madalayya Vadavanu, Yenna Kale Kamba, Dehave Degula, Shirave Honna Kalashavaya, Kudala Sangama Deva, Kelaya, Stavara Kalivuntu Jangama Kalivilla. He says, those who are rich and can afford can construct a Shiva temple, but I am a poor man. And he represents his own body as a temple. Of course, the idea is already there in many ancient Sanskrit sources, and he says, "My feet form the pillars of this temple. The body is the temple, and the and my own head is the golden kalasha of this temple." And he says, "Sthavara kalivuntu, jangama kalivilla." So things that are um, made out of things which are materialistic, they can all die and vanish, but the Jangama one, so what lives will never die. And therefore, these he stresses are the most important things. Now, there are also other poets. So I refer to Akka Mahadevi, and I must give one or two quotations of Akka. So she's also known as famously known as Akka, and she says, "ಲೋಕದ ಚೇಷ್ಟೆಗೆ ರವಿ ಬೀಜವಾದಂತೆ ಕರಣಂಗಳ ಚೇಷ್ಟೆಗೆ ಮನಸ್ಸು ಬೀಜ." So she gives a beautiful comparison. So for all our activities, it is the sun who is the inspirer, and he is the seed of all the activity. And for all the sense organs to function, it is the manas that serves as the bija. Now you can see that the very word Surya, so is something which contains the idea already. The etymology of the word Surya is Sushtu Irayati, Prerayati, iti Surya. So it is the sun who invigorates all activity, who enlivens the world, etc. And therefore, it is the same idea that is presented here. We can see that a good deal of Virshaiva literature, and especially those of Basavana, have ideas which can be traced to the Vedas and the Upanishads. And Basava actually quotes from Vedic texts, even Purusha Sukta he quotes from, and from many Upanishadic statements actually figure word for word in his writings. And thus we see that although these are known as certain new movements in Kannada literature or in Indian history, they only revive certain ideas already present in the Vedas and the Upanishads, and they do not have much new to contribute, but they need that their own ages required the emphasis of certain ideas that obtained in the literature of the Vedas and the Upanishads, which are the primary founts of spirituality, and therefore it is these ideas that they emphasize and underline. So there is another poem of Akka Mahadevi, "ಬೆಟ್ಟದ ಮೇಲೊಂದು ಮನೆಯ ಮಾಡಿ ಮೃಗಗಳಿಗೆ ಅಂಜಿದೊಡೆ ಎಂತಯ್ಯ." So you build a house on top of a hill, and then you say you are afraid of the wild creatures there. How can you say that? And then ಸಂತೆಯೊಳಗೊಂದು ಮನೆ ಮಾಡಿ. So you build a house in a bazaar, and then ಶಬ್ದಗಳಿಗೆ ನಾಚಿದೊಡೆ ಎಂತಯ್ಯ. And if you say that I cannot bear this din and bustle of this city, how can you say that? ಚನ್ನಮಲ್ಲಿಕಾರ್ಜುನನೇ ಕೇಳಯ್ಯ ದೇವ ಕೇಳಯ್ಯ, ಈ ಲೋಕದೊಳಗೆ ಹುಟ್ಟಿದ ಬಳಕ ಸ್ತುತಿ ನಿಂದೆಗಳು ಬಂದರೆ ಮನದಲ್ಲಿ ಕೋಪವ ತಾಳದೆ ಸಮಾಧಾನೇ ಆಗಿರಬೇಕು. So in this world, there are people who praise you and who blame you, and one must have one school and pursue his spiritual goals and pursuits. So these are the ideas that are present in her works. So there's only an illustrative work. We next come to the Haridasa literature, so which constitutes a very important literature. So it is this Haridasa literature which brings out the Vedanta philosophy to the common man in a very simple language. So the Bhagavan Nama Sankirtana is a tradition that starts with the Haridasas. We have numerous Haridasas like Narahari Tirtha, Vyasa Tirtha, Shri Padaraya, Vadiradi Tirtha, Purandaradasa, Kanakadasa, and so on. So Vijayadasa, Gopaladasa, Jagannatha-dasa, Mahipati-dasa, Hedavanakatte Giriyamma, and so on. It is said that the genre of Harikatha also began with the dasas. Just to say a few words about some of the most famous of these, I'll say one or two quotations from Purandaradasa and Kanakadasa. So Purandaradasa is said to have composed 4 lakh songs, and they bring out the essence of the Vedic and Upanishadic literature, and also the essence of the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, and the Puranas. They are all written in a very simple language, such that even a layman can understand. But their language is very powerful and being poetical at the same time. It's only a little above 1,000 works of Purandaradasa that are available, and he is also known as Karnataka Sangeeta Pitamaha because he laid the foundation of Karnataka music. And to bring out a few famous lines of Purandaradasa, so his songs like Dasana Madiko Inna, they are very famous. He says, Binna heke ba illavayya. So I cannot really make request to you, my Lord, with the abundance of my flaws and defects in my personality. I really no voice to make my earnest pleas and request to you. And he also has criticized society once again, which pays attention to the exteriors. So showing, for example, the importance to the external purity and a show of bhakti rather than true bhakti. And he makes reference to achara villada nalige. So we speak sense and nonsense, and the purity of speech is very well emphasized by him. And then he says, Anugala uchinte jivake manu shirandanolmetu tanaka. So we will be pestered by thoughts which are all very distracting and pestered by worries. And it's only when our mind gets to be absorbed in the Lord that there can be an end to this. So it is as though A does not happen without B, and B does not happen without A. So unless we shake ourselves off these worries and concerns of the world, we cannot pay attention to the Lord. And it's only when we pay attention to the Lord that these can be gotten rid of. And therefore, these are two mutually reinforcing things and mutually causative things. And therefore, one must start somewhere and then progress. So when his works are full of metaphors, he says, Kallu sakkare kolliro neevellaru, Pullalochana Sri Krishna Nama Vemba Kallu sakkare kolliro neevellaru. So the sugar candy in the form of Sri Krishna Nama, so the name of Sri Krishna. So, and in another poem he says, Ramanama Payasake Krishna Nama Sakkare Vitalanama Tupo Berisi Baya Chaparisiro. Ramanama is the payasa and Krishna Nama is the sugar that is added to that. And Vitalanama is the ghee that is used there. And you enjoy this Krishna Nama, Ramanama, and so on. He's also famously said to have said, Guruvina Gulama Naguvatanaka Darayadanna Mukti. So unless you become a slave to your Guru, you will never attain Mukti. That refers to the true Guru who is endowed with spiritual powers, and it is only when we serve the Guru with great Shraddha that we can progress in the spiritual path, because the spiritual path is littered with numerous impediments and difficulties, and it's not easy to say that we can overcome all of that with our own strength and our own willpower and so on. And the grace of the Guru is something that is very important. And this is not by any means a kind of slavery to the Guru, but it's a service rendered to the Guru with great devotion. So, and then bring out once again the greatness of the name of the Lord. He says, Niniako nina hangyako nina namada balavandidare sako. I do not care for you, O Lord, because I have the power of your nama, your name, and that is enough to protect me and save me. So all these do not bring out any real conflicts between the two, but on the other hand, they show the power of even the small item of a thing like even Namasmarana, which can prove very powerful. And there was this Channa Basavanna among the Virashaiva poets, so who says, Ninna Bhaktarige Badatanave Kudu. He praised the Lord, O Lord, grant poverty to those who are your true devotees, because it is only those who are in difficulties that will remember the Lord. There is a saying, Sankata Bandhaga Venkataramana, attributed to Purandaradasa. So it's only when you are difficulty that we remember the Lord. Of course, all these are very old ideas. For example, the same ideas obtains in the Mahabharata, where Kunti says, Vipadas santuna shashvat yasu sansmaryate harihi. My Lord, please give us troubles every now and then, because it is in those moments that we remember you. Otherwise, we tend to forget. If you are happy and everything is fine in the worldly manner, we tend to forget you, and therefore we only wish that we have difficulties again and again in life. The lines of Kanakadasa. So he's a scholarly poet also. Purandardasa was also a scholar. And Kanakadasa's poems, they are full of mystic utterances, 1509 to 1609. So he lived a full 100 years. He was said to be deeply influenced by Vishishtadvaita, and like Ramanujacharya and Vedanta Deshika, who lived 100 plus years, he used to have lived for a full 100 years. So he was originally named Timappa Nayaka, and he is from Kaginele of Haveri district. He wrote a work called Mohana Tarangini in Sangatya meter. He's also said to have written Nrisimhastava, Nala Charitra, Haribhakti Sara, and Ramadhani Charitre, and so on. These are some of his works. And some of his poems and verses are excellent. So he praised the Lord. This ಗಿಳಿಯ ಮರಿಯನ್ನು ತಂದು ಪಂಜರದೊಳಗೆ ಪೋಷಿಸಿ ಕಲಿಸಿ ಮೃದು ನುಡಿಗಳನ್ನು ಲಾಲಿಸಿ ಕೇಳುವ ಪರಿಣತರಂತೆ ನೀ ನನಗೆ ತಿಳಿಹಿ ಮತಿಯನು ಎನ್ನ ಜಿಹ್ವೆಗೆ ಮೊಳಗುವಂದದಿ ನಿನ್ನ ನಾಮಾವಳಿಯ ಪೊಗಳಿಕೆ ಇತ್ತು ರಕ್ಷಿಸಿ ನಮ್ಮ ರಣವರತ. So people sometimes bring parrots home, and then they cherish it and nourish it and teach some words to the parrot. And even when the parrot repeats those words not quite distinctly, also they feel very happy and they fondle the word. And even so, my Lord, treat me like one such parrot. So, and teach me reciting your name regularly and protect me this. And the simple language, but yet one full of alliteration, is evident in a poem like this of his. ಈಶ ನಿನ್ನ ಚರಣ ಭಜನೆ ಆಶೆಯಿಂದ ಮಾಡುವೆನು ದೋಷ ರಾಶಿ ನಾಶ ಮಾಡು ಶ್ರೀಶ ಕೇಶವ. So it's all very rhythmical production, so that we can find. ಕಾಮಜನಕ ನಿನ್ನ ನಾಮ ಪ್ರೇಮದಿಂದ ಪಾಡುವಂಥ ನೇಮವೆನಗೆ ಪಾಲಿಸಯ್ಯ ಸ್ವಾಮಿ ವಾಮನ ಪಂಕಜಾಕ್ಷ ನೀನು ಎನ್ನ ಮಂಕು ಬುದ್ಧಿ ಬಿಡಿಸಿ ನಿನ್ನ ಕಿಂಕರನ್ನು ಮಾಡಿಕೊಳ್ಳು ಸಂಕರುಷಣ. So this deals with some all the 24 names of Keshavas. So Keshava Nama. So all these are brought out very well in the works of Purandaradasa, Kanakadasa. So we also had some literature produced during the Keladi period of Mysore, and so that is 1565 to 1763, or 200 years, and almost overlapping with that. So they were in the western Karnataka region, the Keladi kings, and the Mysore Samrajya, 1565 to 1945. That is about 400 years, southern Karnataka, where we had the kings themselves were poets. So we had, for example, kings who were the authors of encyclopedias in Karnataka, and religious commentaries and musical compositions. So were all produced by them. Chikadevaraja Odayar wrote a work called Gita Gopala, which closely follows Gita Govinda. So while Gita Govinda is an Ashtapadi work, this is a Saptapadi composition, and this propagates the Vaishnava faith in an excellent manner. We also have various other poets like Sarvajna, who was a mendicant, he was a Veerashaiva poet, and there are numerous didactic poems of his, so which give both Lokaniti and Adhyatmaniti very well. For example, he says regarding our wealth, how we handle our riches. So he gives some beautiful statements. Salavanu kumbaga halogarundanti. When you borrow money, it's something that we find very enjoyable. But when the lenders come and try to get back our money, it is then that we feel the sorrow of that. ಸಾಲಿಗರು ಕೊಂಡು ಎಳೆದಾಗ ಕಿಬ್ಬದಿಯ ಕೀಲು ಮುರಿದಂತೆ ಸರ್ವಜ್ಞ. It is as though our bones are fractured, as it were. And the way we handle our money, sometimes we become curmudgeons and keep all our riches to ourselves and do not share with others. And sometimes we do not even enjoy it ourselves. So he says, ಉಳ್ಳಲ್ಲಿ ಉಣಲಿಲ್ಲ, ಉಳ್ಳಲ್ಲಿ ಉಡಲಿಲ್ಲ, ಉಳ್ಳಲ್ಲಿ ದಾನ ಕೊಡಲು ಒಲ್ಲದವನ ಒಡವೆ, ಕಳ್ಳಗೆ ನೃಪಗೆ ಸರ್ವಜ್ಞ. The person who neither enjoys his riches nor distributes among the worthy. So he saves it for either thieves or for the king to come and collect as taxes. So we find that all these are once again Sanskrit Subhashtas, which says Nachora Haryam, Nacharaja Haryam, and so on. So Vidyadhanam Sarvadhana Pradhanam. So, or the Panchatantra verse which says Tasya Tritiya Gatir Bhavati, Danam Bhogo Nashas Tisro Gatayo Bhavanti Vittasya, Yo Navadati Nabhunte Tasya Tritiya Gatir Bhavati. So, thus we find that there are many words of wisdom in the writings of these poets. Mid 16th to late 17th century was Lakshmisha, who wrote Jaimini Bharata in Shatpadi meter. So, it is said that many yakshaganas and bailatas of the 16th century had some inspiration from the writings of Lakshmisha. 1704 to 1714, Kanthirava Narasimharaja Valayar, he was a master of several languages and several fields, and he is said to have authored 14 yakshaganas. So, and he was a master of Sangeeta, Nataka, and Natya. And 1794 to 1868 was a period of Mummadi Krishnaraja Vadayar. So more than 40 writings, including Saugandhika Prinaya. So, and it is from then on that we come to the modern period. So I will not be dealing with the modern period much. So one early work in the modern period is Mudra Manjusha of Kempu Narayana, 1823. So this work deals with the theme of Mudra Rakshasa, though there is some small variation in the story outline. Still, it effectively brings out the great wisdom of Chanakya in an excellent manner. So the suspense is very well maintained and the language is very transparent and very powerful. When we come to the modern period, the 20th century, we have various important writers. I'll mention only a few of them. So B.M. Sri, Panjay Mangesh Rao, Kailasam, Vendre, Kuvempu, Putina Samachar, DVG, famous DV Gundappa, K.S. Narasimhaswamy, Devudu, and the more recent S.L. Bhairappa are some of the very well-known and great and famous authors. I have not touched upon many other writers. So Chaundaraya, who condensed Mahapurana of Janasena and Gunabhadra into Chaundaraya Purana, and then Durga Simha, who wrote Panchatantra in Kannada, and then Nagachandra, who wrote Pamparamayana, Nayasena, who wrote Dharmamrita, and Nagavarma II, who wrote Karnataka Bhasha Bhushana, Kavyavalokana, Abhidhana Vastukosha, and so on. So there are many more who wrote numerous works. So I refer to the work of Helavanakatte Giriyamma. So we do not even know the exact dates of many of these. And there are many, see, for example, there is one Chudaratna Shataka. It's an anonymous work. And there is a beautiful quote which says that learning Vidya at an early age is something which is very important. So, which says Chikkandinola Vidya. So, the knowledge that we attain in an early age, so that becomes something very important. And I'm not able to get that verse. ಮಕ್ಕಳಿಗೆ ತಂದೆ ಬಾಲ್ಯದೊಳ್ ಅಕ್ಕರ ವಿದ್ಯೆಗಳನ್ನು ಅರಿಪದಿಯದೊಡೆ ಕೊಂದಂ, the father who does not teach children at a very early age, so he can be said to have actually killed the children. Lakkadhana miralu kedugum, so even if the children are very rich, So having lakhs of rupees, it's just no use. Chikkandina vidya koragu for Chudaratna. So every poem ends with the Ankitanama Chudaratna, and he says, Chikkandina vidya koragu. It is the education that is imparted at a young age. It is that which really saves us. And he says, Barayada kai, Bandhugalam Porayada kai, Sutaraneti Kondada kai, Karedu, Budharigiyada kai, Maragai, Murulgai Galante Chudaratna. The hand that does not write, that is the person who is illiterate and cannot write. And the hand that does not offer shelter and protection to the indigent relatives and others, Bandhugalam Porayada kai. And then one who is not fortunate enough to have kids and cannot fondle them with his hands, Sutaran etti kondada the kai, and the hand that does not generously give away gifts to the worthy scholars. Karedu budharigi the kai, you must call them, invite them, and do your generous gifts to them. So it's just a wooden hand, Maragai, Maralgai, Kalanti Chudaratna. He brings out the importance of that. So thus we have a number of modern writers who have done a great contribution to Kannada literature, and the most prominent among them should be DVG and even Devudu Narasimha Shastri, who wrote on many epic and Puranic themes. These two deserve great mention. And one thing that you must be careful about is regarding the contribution of moderners and Westerners. So, for example, we find people praising persons like Kittel, who wrote the massive Kannada dictionary to the skies and so on. But we must also not miss to notice the fact that they also had a hidden agenda. Not exactly hidden, it was a very open agenda, and that was conversion. So these Christian missionaries, they came and established their seminaries and missionaries in various parts of the country to convert people. And it was not to translate the biblical literature into the Indian languages that they did lot of literature, dictionary making, etc., in the respective languages. And many people in India think that theirs is a great language because some German or some French scholar wrote their first dictionary and so on. But you must note that they all had an agenda to deride our religion, so to deride our heritage and so on. For example, in Kittel's dictionary, we find a number of examples, usages that are given, making a caricature of and mocking Brahmins. So even for language usage, he wants to give examples which precisely, so it is very selective and focused so as to deride our religion and our heritage and so on. So one must be careful not to miss these facts also, apart from the fact that because of the Macaulay system of education, we by and by gradually lost all interest in our own heritage and even came to despise our own heritage and so on. There was a systematic work of centuries, 2 to 3 centuries of work, undermining the value of our heritage and making people lose all concern and all pride about our heritage. It was Ananda Kumar Swami who said that if only some 2 or 3 generations miss Sanskrit, so if they are not exposed to Sanskrit, it is sufficient to be the ruin of the heritage of India, and that is proving true. So something like 70 years we have seen how systematically Sanskrit was undermined, and those who pursued Sanskrit, all the arts and crafts of our country and our heritage, so they all found it so difficult to survive even, and therefore the children of all great Sanskrit scholars, of all great musicians, and of all great dance teachers, they all decided, because of utter poverty under which they were growing, they were groaning. So they were they sent them to convents and English schools so that they will be able to make their ends meet and earn 2 meals a day. So This it was systematically destroyed by the British and the Europeans, and they had taken a vow, as it were, that they will destroy Sanskrit heritage here, and if Indians want to learn Sanskrit and get to know about their heritage, they must come to Europeans and Americans and must get to learn from them. So it was under such compulsions and hidden agenda that they worked, and therefore the production of dictionaries and study of, for example, the languages, like production of comparative dictionaries of Dravidian languages and so on and so forth, all had this kind of agenda, and to show that what was in Sanskrit was all trivial and nothing but see, false see, leads and so on. And what they would believe is all faith, and what we would believe is all superstition. So this is the kind of so whenever they refer to any king, they would say this tribe, that tribe. So even the Vedic rishis, they would refer to as only tribes, whereas regarding their own people, they would refer to as communities and so on. So this kind of language laden with thought, this kind of loaded language, was regularly employed by the European scholars to undermine our faith in our own heritage and our love of our heritage and so on. Now I have given a very brief overview of Kannada literature, and one can definitely take a deeper look into the Kannada literature for its very many gems. The imagination of many Kannada poets is extraordinary and is in no way inferior to many Sanskrit poets. So that way one can enjoy Kannada literature. And what I say of Kannada literature is somewhat similarly true of all Indian languages. This is only typically representative. And one scholar in the West at least knew very well the importance of Kannada language, and therefore he made a point to master this language, and with that as the instrument, tried to undermine our heritage so very effectively. And that person is none other than Sheldon Pollock, so who made it a point to study Kannada language very deeply, and he studied here with some of the best of the scholars, and ultimately it is all directed towards undermining our heritage, and therefore we must beware of these scholars and study our literature with good faith and regard. I thank you, dear Meg Kalyan Sundaram. I thank Indica for inviting me to speak on Kannada literature, giving an introduction. So within the span of just an hour, it's difficult to cover the vastness of the literature, and I have only given a few glimpses and some samples of the literature. Thank you for your patience. Thank you once again for inviting me. Namaskar, all of you.
Namaskaram. Thank you so much, Professor Kannan, for not only giving a chronological perspective from the beginnings until the recent Padma Bhushan recipient, Bhairabbaji. You have covered such a vast span of time, and not only have you shown the time depth, but you have also shown the breadth in terms of the different genres. I am a complete, my knowledge of both the language and about the language in the case of Kannada is close to zero. And this has been such a wonderful exposition for me to learn, and for people like me who have joined it, who had very little knowledge perhaps of about Kannada language, forget knowing the language, but even about the language. I think you have given so many pointers that one can go back to. Of course, it is there on the video, and those pointers can help to guide deep. I thank you very much for joining us at Center for Bharatiya Languages and sharing your perspectives on an introduction to Kannada literature. Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you.